Oops. Okay, that's not good. There we are. Somehow, in handling this, it got the volume the adjustments got changed a little bit. There we go. Okay, and I get a little read out there so I know that it's working. Cooperative Legacy Project interview number 23, January 5th, 2006. We're visiting with Ron Gerlach, manager of the Aurora Cooperative Oil Company at Stickney, South Dakota. Ron, where and when were you born?
I was born on September 4th, 1950, at the Douglas County Memorial Hospital in Armour, South Dakota.
Oh, okay. And was your family were from right around here? Where did you grow up at?
I grew up east of Corsica, about 10 miles east of Corsica.
Okay. And when did your family settle there?
Well, my parents got married in 1940, and they had lived most of their lives east of Corsica. My mother was from Davison County, but it was on the southern end of Davison County. So, courting days back in those years, it wasn't too big of a road trip, I guess, for my dad to go see my mom.
And where ultimately was your family from? Gerlach sounds a little German to me.
It's very German. All my ancestors originated from Germany on both my maternal and paternal sides. They all came from Germany. In fact, same community, just about, and that dates back to the early 1880s when they came over to South Dakota, homesteaded.
Okay. You have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have 3 brothers. I have my oldest brother is Douglas. He's born in 1941. And my second brother was Wayne. He was born in 1942. And my third brother was Keith, and he was born in 1945. And I'm the baby.
And no sisters?
No sisters.
Okay. What was your father's name?
My father's name was Leonard A. for Arnold Gerlach.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about him? What sort of a guy was he?
He was a nice man, good man. He was short, a little heavy set, worked hard his whole life. He was a good father. I have a lot of fond memories of him. He left us very prematurely. He died at the age of 61. He was born in 1917 and passed away in 1978 of congestive heart failure. 61 isn't a real old age when you see the modern technology we have nowadays, which is some 30, 40 years later. But I just felt that he didn't quite get to live out his entire life like he should have.
Yeah. How about your mother? What was her name?
My mother's name was Wilma A., or Amelia. She was a Neubauer, and she grew up in the southern end of Davison County, and that of course adjoins Douglas County. And I'm sure back in those years they got acquainted through church groups, visiting church groups. Actually, they both attended the same house of worship, so that wasn't a big deal to be crossing over into a different church at that time, but that's how they got acquainted in their young people's society.
Okay. Which kind of churches were those?
German Lutheran. It used to be called Missouri Synod Lutheran. Kind of a strict German Lutheran church, I would call it.
Yeah. When you were talk a little bit about your mom.
Okay. Well, she come from a large family. There were probably 4 girls and 5 boys, or more. I don't even keep track of them all. But it's not really a whole lot to say. Her dad died at a young age too. He died in 1939, and she left home in 1940, as I said earlier, and was married to my dad. But those kids worked hard in those days, especially with not having a father. I'm sure the younger men of the family had to take over and fill the void left by the passing of their father. So those kids worked hard in those years trying to keep the farm going and that. And they still have a member of the family living on the very homestead in southern Davison County.
You mentioned that you had a brother born in 1941. Did your dad serve in the military during the war? Or?
No, he did not.
He didn't.
No.
Okay.
Nope. No military service.
Mm-hmm. When you were young, did you want to farm, or did you have other aspirations?
Oh, I had an interest in farming. I loved living on the farm when I was young and at home. But just never ever made it come together. It seemed as I was growing up and getting older, it seemed farming was becoming a harder and harder way of life. And even in my time, it was really hard to get started if you didn't have the wherewithal to have a relative or a rich uncle or somebody that was willing to help you get started. It was just about impossible. Yet there are some people that have made it fly. They've made it work. But I got started in cooperatives, I guess, before I got started farming. So I didn't really have much of a decision to make.
Well, when you were growing up, how was life out on the farm different than it is today? You mentioned that it was getting more difficult when you were thinking about getting into it, but how was it different?
Well, I grew up in some years. In fact, I was a young man already through the 70s. Farming, I think, was about as profitable then as we'll ever have seen it. The 80s, of course, got a little tougher, and I was already here at Stickney in the 80s. But I don't know, as a young man, I think farming is still a good way of life. So many people now have off the farm income to supplement their income so they can continue to stay on the farm, and I just really think it's a really good place to raise children, and you're kind of on your own. You're your own boss out there, and it's just privacy. It's just a good place to raise a family.
Do you feel like perhaps that it's a shame that maybe there aren't more kids today that can grow up with that kind of experience?
Absolutely, especially in the larger cities. Here in rural South Dakota, everybody, even if they do live in a small town or a city, they've always got cousins and that are farm oriented and can get a feel of that. But in the larger cities, there's some people that have never witnessed a baby calf being born or a litter of pigs from a sow or something like that. And I just think they really miss out on some of what I call finer things in life.
Mm-hmm. Where did you go to school? Did you? Some people, there's still a lot of people around who went to country schools. Did you?
I went to a one-room country grade school, and it was an excellent school. It was a very large one-room school. It was a 2-story. It had a full basement, had indoor plumbing, which was not real common in the 50s, because I started grade school in 1956, I guess. So we did not have running water, but we had indoor plumbing. By that I mean we had indoor toilets. And I never experienced having to take that trip out behind the schoolhouse to use the bathroom facilities. On rainy and cold days, of course, we could play in the basement because it was a full open basement. Had a big old coal stove, floor furnace, I guess you could call it. But it was a very large square one-room school. The entire east wall was solid windows. It was an excellent school. Following graduation from grade school, of course, I started attending high school in Corsica, South Dakota, at Corsica High School.
Okay.
And that, again, was a very good school. We had the largest class of graduating students, and that numbered 39 when we graduated in 1968. And we hold a record. There's never ever been that large of a class that graduated from Corsica High School as the class of 1968. There was never any before that achieved that or got over that amount, and there hasn't been since. So that was kind of a special year, I guess. A lot of baby boomers.
A lot of baby boomers. And had there been any consolidations, any other small schools consolidating with Corsica prior to that?
No, that hadn't really started yet. There might have been some consolidations going on of one-room country grade schools where they would have consolidated into with the town schools. In fact, there was quite a little of that, but not like we're seeing nowadays in the years of 2000 and beyond, where towns are consolidating with towns and joining schools, and school districts are consolidating with other school districts to basically survive.
Mm-hmm. And that sometimes is a little painful, perhaps, because of rivalries that used to exist between towns?
Absolutely. That's usually the key factor, is the rivalry between towns. Nobody wants to give up their school. The fear, of course, if they give up their school, their town is going to diminish from the face of the earth.
Did you attend college at all?
I did not. And we may be getting ahead of ourselves here, but graduated in the spring of 1968.
No.
And I was working on the farm with my father and my brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And the manager at that time of the Corsica Co-op Association, Peter J. Noteboom, they called him Junior.
Mm-hmm.
He was looking for a bulk field driver. And he thought, being there was three brothers and my dad on the farm, that maybe one of us was looking for an outside job, and he wanted someone from east of Corsica that knew where everyone lived out there. So I was approached if I would want to assume that position, and I guess that's how it all got started.
He was kind of a long-term manager down there.
Yes, he was. I can't give you the years, but all total, I think it was over 30 years that he had managed in Corsica.
And that was a very successful co-op at that time.
Yes, it was, and he was a good manager too. He did a good job for him. He was very community minded. He was also company minded. He built that co-op to what it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where did you meet your wife?
Got to go back to school. We met in high school.
Mm-hmm.
The first few days of high school, we met. Her last name, her maiden name was Groen, Groen,
mm-hmm.
and of course
Sounds
she
Dutch.
sat. It is Dutch.
Okay.
That's another story.
Mm-hmm.
And she sat, of course, right in front of me through 4 years of school. So that's kind of where we got acquainted. And I guess had it not been for the fact that we'd went to school together, we probably wouldn't have spent the better part of our lives together, which has just been 35 years. We celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary.
Mm-hmm. What was her first name?
Jane.
Oh, okay. Did you went to work for the co-op right away? You didn't get drafted or anything back in those days?
I was a member of the South Dakota National Guard.
You were, okay.
And I spent 6 years fulfilling my military obligation with them. And a position opened up in the kitchen, so they asked if I wanted to be a cook. And I said, well, sure, why not? So that's what I did. I was a cook for 6 years.
Okay,
white hat and white apron and white pants and white shirt.
Okay, have you ever cooked for co-op meetings?
Some,
too busy?
yes, yeah, some. Yeah. I do a lot of cooking at home. I enjoy cooking. It's a challenge.
A little different cooking for large numbers of people.
It is. With the military, we trained to cook for 100 men at a time, and that's a lot bigger proportions than what you're used to for just a small family.
Mm-hmm. You have kids.
I do.
How many of them?
I have 3 sons, and I'm very proud of all 3 of them. The oldest one is Ronald. Middle name's Lee. Can't imagine where we got that name. He was born in 1972. I have a second son. His name is Jay Allen. He was born in 1975. And I have the youngest son is Tyler, and he just turned 21.
And
22.
He's a student over at
SDSU in Brookings, yes.
Okay. And you mentioned your brothers. Are they still farming?
One of them is. The oldest one is still on the farm, mm-hmm. and he lives south of Mount Vernon now, or east of Stickney. Mm-hmm. He's getting close to retirement, mm-hmm. but he is still on the farm yet. I have the second brother, Wayne. He is a district sales manager for Producer Hybrids, sells seed. Mm-hmm. And the brother next to me, Keith, he is employed at Twin City Fan in Mitchell in manufacturing.
Okay. And I guess we talked a little bit. Sometimes we cover questions before I ask them, and my next question involved how you got involved in the cooperative movement. Were your parents cooperative members?
Yes, they were. My dad bought all of his crop inputs and farm inputs from a cooperative. I can remember as a young man when the fuel truck came in the yard, of course, and he had his little box of candy on the seat. He was my favorite guy, of course. But my dad had always done business with cooperatives. I don't think he did hardly much with independents if he could buy from a cooperative.
Yeah, and there were a lot of co-ops around in those days.
There were a lot more than there are now, because of course there have been a lot of consolidations with cooperatives and merges and so forth.
Yep. I noticed in driving down Main Street here that there's an old co-op creamery on Main Street there that still has the sign on the front of it.
Yes, Stickney has been had a rich history of cooperatives. We still have a local farmers elevator that's a cooperative, of course, and as you mentioned, the co-op creamery and the Aurora co-op here now. So 3 co-ops in one town, although they weren't all running at the same time. The cooperative creamery closed before this company was started, but the longest surviving co-op has been the co-op elevator, because they were started earlier than the Aurora co-op was.
Late 30s, was it?
Yes.
In fact, I think I was down here, I think maybe to their 50th annual meeting a few years ago now.
Yep.
What's the origin of this co-op?
Well, the way I understand it, a bunch of farmers grouped together and got involved with the Farmers Union Central Exchange field staff at that time. That would have been Don Graff. And they could get an operating loan, I guess, to get started, and they did go out and sell Class A preferred stock to get the company going. I think they were $500 shares, if I'm not mistaken. No, maybe they were just $100 shares, but some people bought more than one, of course. But when you try to visualize trying to do that in this day and age, it wouldn't happen, because back then $100 was a lot of money as well. For somebody to take money right out of the old sock to help get a business started. But I guess the bottom line is still that they owned the business when it was done, because we are still a local cooperative, locally owned and operated and run by a board of directors.
When did you first go to work here? That would have been straight from Corsica?
Yes. The manager's position came open here in the summer of 1981. And I applied for the position and was interviewed and was hired in the fall. I believe my first, it was in the end of November of 1981 that I assumed the management position here.
And that's about, you've been manager for what, like 4, I think if I remember right, there were like 4 managers here,
Yes.
And you're one of them,
Yes.
the longest term
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Probably.
Yes, it's going on my 25th year here. First manager was here 4 years, the second one was here 13 or 14, something like that, and the third one is here 5, and I've been the 4th manager since. I guess it's not that common to have that short of a turnover, or not have a turnover, I guess would be the correct words. But
what attracted you to cooperatives as far as a job? More than something, maybe was it anything different from the normal the rest of the business structure? Let's say the investor-owned or private businesses.
that's a good question, Chuck, and I guess my response to that, I guess I could see that I probably wasn't going to farm, and I've always liked agriculture and obviously like farmers, and I thought this is one way I could stay connected with agriculture. If I wasn't going to actively operate a farm, I could still be connected with agriculture through the cooperative system, and apparently that has been working for me because I'm still doing that today.
Okay. When you first started here, how difficult was business? Was it easier or more difficult than it is today?
It's kind of a tough question,
Yeah.
but
Times were different.
times were different. The mid-'80s were tough. There was a farm crisis. I remember that very well. And we managed to struggle through some pretty tough years, but survived it. If it was any worse than today, I couldn't say that it is, because today we're faced with tight margins and we're just not making as much profit as we have. We need to tighten our belts as much as we can, try and operate as lean of a machine as we can. These are not real good times in agriculture either, and I don't know if they will ever rebound. We keep hoping they will. But the profitable years, the 70s, were probably the shining star. That's when farmers and cooperatives both were making a lot of money. So,
you had a chance. You talked about Junior Note Boom. You work with with other interesting people. You want to talk a little bit about some of the people you've been involved with over the years, both maybe Corsica and maybe up here.
As far as managers, I've only ever worked for 2 managers, and the first one, of course, was Junior Note Boom, and I learned a lot from that individual. Second manager I worked for was Richard Adams, who later on went to work for Corporate Senex Land O'Lakes. And I learned a lot from him as well. An entirely different style of management, but I'm not saying one was better than the other. It's just a different style of management. But I learned a lot from 2 different styles, and I think that has been beneficial to my career. As far as working for people up here, Stickney has been a good community. This is a good little local cooperative. It's always had a strong balance sheet and financials. We've had good, loyal customers, which kind of allude to the successes that we've enjoyed over the years. I've always had an excellent board of directors to work with. They've been really good people to work with. No reservations whatsoever about the community.
Okay. How about folks from the regional that you've had to work with? You mentioned Rich, who went on to the regional. Did you work with him later on?
I did, yes. In fact, he called on me as a field staff member. Things have changed in that aspect. When I first started, you had a lot of help, backup support from your field staff, and that has kind of gone by the wayside. We don't really have anybody. We have a business services manager nowadays, which helps us with financial planning and so forth, but as far as having a bona fide rep, that has kind of gone by the wayside, just with the changing times. I'm sure all the other regionals and interregionals have had the same change with their operations as well. But that's the one thing we miss, because we used to have a lot of support from the field staff and just don't have that anymore.
You mentioned that area, general area. There's been a lot of, in recent years, a lot of what is known as regionalizations. Is that a difficult issue for the local co-op that may be faced to deal in a competitive basis with a regionalized facility that's owned by the same regional that they're trying to work with?
That's a good point, Chuck, because we find ourselves competing with our very supplier, and it kind of puts us at an unfair advantage. Don't have real good feelings about that, and I think I can speak for a lot of other managers that that's becoming quite a concern for us. And when you're surrounded by regionally owned facilities, it just makes you wonder how long you can continue to survive as a strong locally owned cooperative when you're competing against your own supplier, who has we have at a disadvantage because there's one less link in the chain when a local is buying from the regional and when the regional is buying from itself. So how long locals can continue to survive with that is a good question. But yes, that is a struggle.
And is there a kind of a pressure to join into a regionalization?
The regionals tell us that they don't want all the locals. They couldn't afford them all, but they seem to be interested in the larger ones. Whether the regional would even be interested in our small local remains to be seen. But there's getting to be less and less locals, as we all very well know.
I guess I was kind of surprised recently to see Mitchell, who I always thought was one of the strongest local co-ops in the state, to go into something like that.
And then Mitchell and Corsica have joined forces together, and it's called Farmers Alliance. And they're good neighbors, don't get me wrong, but they're still competitors, and they basically got one side of our trade territory saturated because their trade territory is right next to ours, of course. So, yes, that is a concern.
Okay. Earlier on, we talked a little bit about what you picked up with managers that you had worked with prior to taking over here at Stickney. Did you develop any particular approach to working with your employees, as sort of a management philosophy?
That's a tough question. I guess I have always just tried to treat my employees like I expected to be treated when I was working for someone. They all deem a degree of respect. I consider them all professionals. I've had a good working relationship with our employees. We do not have a high turnover here, probably for part of that reason that we just get along very well as a team, and have just really had a good working relationship. Our staff is starting to get older because we haven't had those turns that some companies experience, and everybody has it's apparently been a good place to work because we've got a lot of our same people. Some of the older term employees, one of them started in 1973, a couple of them in 1977. There's a few 80s. I've got my office manager started here in 1962. The company was 5 years old, and she's been continuously employed here ever since. Her husband started here in 1965, so that's 41 years that he's been here continuous. So just haven't really had a lot of turnover here, and I guess we've just always been able to get along and make it work. That doesn't mean we always agree on everything, but we usually seem to work through it.
That probably leads to a lot of staff loyalty if they've been here that long. They kind of identify with the cooperative.
Yes.
Very strongly.
Yes.
Do you think that that cooperatives are, and we talked about some of the competition, but do you think that local cooperatives or the regionalized ones are continuing still to play the role that I think the speaker at the Co-op Month banquet last fall called market correcting tools, that you have a positive influence out there as opposed to the private businesses?
I would like to think that we do, and when I look at some of the pricing structures of some of the independents, it seems they have to adjust their pricing to compensate for the earnings or dividends that the cooperative gives out. It's just a concern, again, how much longer we can operate like that. Managers do have a concern. These cooperatives were started as buying groups, and I will give the South Dakota Farmers Union and the National Farmers Union credit. I know they started a lot of these locals out here, a lot of hard work on their part. Cooperatives were organized to be buying groups for the farmer owners, but that doesn't seem to work as well as it did at first. The last few years, we start finding that we're trying to organize buying groups within the cooperative system. We should not have to do that. We already have a buying group in place, but it seems to have lost some of its functionality for whatever reason.
How important do you think cooperative education is? Obviously, if people maybe don't understand cooperatives as well as they may have when they started them, do you think that the education program is an important?
The educational program is a very integrative part of the cooperative system. South Dakota Farmers Union has been doing an excellent job of educating young future cooperators. We do get involved with the educational program by contributing funds. I know several of the people that are involved in cooperative education. I think that's very important. The young farmer operator today wants his best price up front. He doesn't care about a dividend as much as maybe his father or grandfather did, and that's where cooperative education becomes so important, is to educate those future farmers of tomorrow about the cooperative way of doing business.
And I guess that was going to be one of my additional questions regarding co-op loyalty, which was a big factor for the founding generation of the co-ops, but as you alluded, is maybe not so significant for the younger producers today. Do you see any way around that problem?
No, I don't, unfortunately. I wish I did have an answer. I alluded to this earlier in the interview, that the Aurora Co-op has enjoyed a lot of successes, and that is to be attributed to the good, loyal customers that we've had all these years. They were very loyal customers, but that seems to be disappearing. The younger generation, we just don't have the loyalty that we used to, and we don't expect to have the business set in front of us on a platter. We do expect to have to go out and earn it, but along with that comes a little bit of loyalty. And nowadays it seems you can be sold out for pennies on a gallon of gas, or a few dollars on a ton of fertilizer, whereas years ago they still felt they were doing business with their own company, and they would overlook that, and maybe they're being forced into being better merchandisers and better shoppers and buyers because of the general economy to start with.
And as a part of that, it's probably more difficult, but I guess I wouldn't want to answer the question for you, to get younger producers to think in the long term as opposed to this season.
That's true. Younger producers, you mentioned younger producers. When I first came here to Stickney, I was obviously younger than any of my board members. And as I look at my board today, out of a 7-man board, I probably only have 1 or 2 board members that are older than I. The rest of them are all younger than I, and they're all younger producers. They have a vision for the future. They're concerned about the cooperative system, as well as myself, a manager of a local, is. But it's just interesting to see how with time that all changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I guess we talked a bit about some of the challenges facing organizations and cooperatives in rural areas. What seems to you like the biggest change that you see from say the early '80s when you started, as far as challenges? The economic one is probably certainly there, but is it different today than it was then?
The economic consideration is, of course, a large factor. Regulations and red tape are a lot more prevalent today than they were back in the 80s. Some of the regs that we are forced to deal with are just about insurmountable anymore. In a small company, to have all the regulations in place, like for DOT requirements is a prime example. We have to have the same records that a large trucking company would have, when in fact we have a fuel truck or a propane truck on the highway that's hauling hazardous material, and yet we are being forced to run along with these large trucking companies, where they probably hire one person to do that job, and we can't afford that, of course, so it probably all falls on the general manager's desk, unless he delegates someone to do it for him. And then he still has the responsibility of seeing to it that it gets carried out. I would say regulations would probably, be the biggest factor. That, and just the lower margins that we're being forced to deal with in the course of what the day-to-day business operations.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to deal with the tank situation here, as far as I know a lot of co-ops did during the time when they were focusing on spills from fuel tanks?
Yes. We went to an above ground storage system for our station pumps, pulling supply out of our bulk storage tanks. Do not have underground tanks at this facility. But now the Environmental Protection Agency is forcing us all to upgrade our bulk petroleum plants, spending from $100 to $170,000 to upgrade them, and in the margins that we're seeing these days, it's just not feasible for us to do. And my concern with that is if a small local co-op can't afford to do it, what is a little mom and pop operation that probably has less gallons and less people than we do? It's basically going to force them to close their doors. That's getting to be a large concern as well.
Rules and regulations that seem to be designed to deal with big companies, but being applied to smaller businesses as well that are not able to deal with that.
That is correct. Yep.
One of the positive elements over the last number of years, since 1980, has been the development of ethanol in South Dakota. The co-op here markets ethanol blend fuel.
Yes, we do, and soy diesel as well. That's given our farmers, our customers, a good feeling because they're utilizing some of their own product. And I understand from your new Farmers Union president, he is very much an advocate of biofuels, saying that he's using like a 30% mix, which is very expensive. But I have to respect him for that. He says if I want to promote it, I have to start with myself, and I have to give him credit for that because that's pretty expensive. But he's using his own product. That's exactly right.
Are there a lot of the farmers around here that are invested in any of the ethanol plants?
I think there's some of that. Just how much, I guess I'm not real sure. But there is some of that. Yes.
They're going to be building one up by Mitchell. Is that going to? Have they folks from here had a chance to invest in that?
Well, that one sold out pretty quick. They were turning them away at the door because they had sold their shares and apparently were closing them out. And I did hear some discussion about that some were turned away at the door. So I think there was an attempt, and I think there are some of our customers that have invested, some money into the plants too.
Has there been any talk about doing anything down this way? I know that Platte, they talked about it for a while.
There was too many obstacles, like natural gas supply, and I don't know if water was an issue because that's not very far from the river. But I know the ethanol gas was an issue, and that kind of fell by the wayside.
What kind of advice would you give someone today who was wanting to get involved in cooperatives?
As an employee, or as a manager, or as a customer?
Let's start out with customers.
Okay. Well,
or members, hopefully.
Yes. I guess just like to remind members in the cooperative system, we may not always be the cheapest on the products we sell, but we hope to be here for the long term along with the customer. We hope to be here to provide the services you need. But if we're only going to be fixing the tires and doing some of the odds and ends stuff, and when it comes to the big ticket items like the fertilizers and chemicals and that, if we're sold out for pennies on a dollar, the day is going to come where we probably won't be here for that tire repair because we won't be around. That's the only consideration I guess I would ask. I know money talks, and if you can buy it cheaper at XYZ than at your local co-op, that's probably what's going to happen. But I don't think the local cooperatives will be able to survive if they don't have the support from their community.
How about the potential employees and managers?
Well, for employees, I think a cooperative is a good place to work. My entire career has been with cooperatives. I've never worked any place else other than a 3-day stitch on a road crew, running a packer. But I worked for cooperatives my entire life, and I don't think I'll ever be a rich man. But I'm getting to the point where I'm old enough to realize that first of all, you can't take it with you. The pockets in them suits they bury you in don't have deep pockets anyway, so there's no need for that. I guess I'm just hoping to live a fulfilled life. I've raised a nice family. I have a wife and family and grandchildren that I'm proud of, and there's more success in that than in building a big old nest egg, I guess. I have always been able to be home at night. Not all jobs allow that. I value my time at home, and because I've worked at a local business like a cooperative, it's allowed me to be home at night with my family where I belong. So the cooperative system definitely has had employment pluses, and I feel they've had benefits for us that are comparable with the outside world or the independent world. We wouldn't have the longevity of employees that we have today if we wouldn't have a decent benefit package for them, because you do have to compete. You're not going to get good people if you don't have a decent benefit package for them.
How has the community around here changed over the years, looking at the wider community? Because the co-op is such an essential part of the community, particularly for a town the size of Stickney.
In what way? You're asking how they've changed?
Yeah, how has the community changed? I mean, the broader community, the rural area and the town.
Well, as in every other community in South Dakota, there's a lot less farms than there have been in the past, and we're all aware of that. We're all concerned about that. Bigger farmers are surviving. Their farming operations are becoming larger as they're acquiring some of the smaller farms. A lot of them aren't buying locally. It's become a very mobile society. Every large farm operator has one or two trucks on the road and can haul his grain into a community and bring fertilizer back. So they're basically set up to be self-sustaining, pretty much bypassing us. And that becomes a issue that's hard to deal with as well, because we need that business to survive. And if it's not going to be here, we're not real sure how long we're going to be able to survive as locals. And I'm not just talking about one local, I'm talking about all of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We talked earlier about schools. The population of the rural schools is down considerable. You talked about your class in 1968 being the biggest one ever at Corsica. That's got to be a difficult situation too. It is, and it's facing our local community as well as some of our neighbors and pretty much the whole state. This state aid fund formula is really hitting them hard, because as we're getting less farms, we're seeing less people, less students. So the state aid is dropping. Well, it still costs so much money to run that school, whether you got 100 kids or 120 kids or so on, and that's becoming quite a concern. Our local school is faced with some of the same issues that we are faced as a local cooperative and a local business. They're not sure how long they can hang on either. They've got some good reserves built up, but you keep gnawing away at them reserves. It isn't very many years down the road that you'll be looking at doing something, and merging with another school isn't always the answer either, just like it's not always the answer for two co-ops to merge either. It might put the misery off for 5 or 10 years, but eventually something still will have to be done. So, and as we said earlier, no community wants to lose their school, because they lose their school, they lose their identity, and a lot that goes along with it, it seems. So, big concern. Has these kind of circumstances, have they led to more of a community spirit and community unity than there was before, knowing what they're faced with, or is it perhaps been the reverse?
I think it's pulled them closer together, because we have to realize if we don't pull together, we definitely aren't going to survive. And yet you still see some instances of someone not buying locally, and that's probably the biggest problem we have of any, is not having all of that local support that is very much needed nowadays.
Mm-hmm. And that's an issue facing a lot of the small businesses, I would guess, in a community like this, as well as the co-op.
It is. It's not just the cooperative. We've been fortunate. We've had several new businesses in our small local community. We've got a good welding shop that's in our town now that does a lot of continuous fence manufacturing and employs several people. And we just recently, after the first of the year, had a new lumberyard that's opened up in town, which we never thought we'd ever see to have a lumberyard again. And they've renovated a building and are in business.
Now, there's a Great Plains sign over there on Main Street. Is that a...
That is the lumberyard I'm
That is the
referring to.
lumberyard, okay.
That's brand new. That's opened its doors on the second day of January.
Now, is that a cooperative?
No,
It's not.
it's private.
Private.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, now the Great Plains used to be a cooperative unit of GTA.
I think this is just the name that they
They
picked.
sold the name.
Yep.
Probably. Okay. Okay. So I guess I come down to my last question. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future? We've been getting a little bit of both, I think, in our conversation. But
I'm still optimistic. We still are always going to have customers, farmers, and urban people as well. Hopefully they want to do business with us, and we can help each other. But yes, I'm optimistic. I don't mean to sound that we're throwing the towel in by any means. There's a lot of good opportunities out there. My son, who's attending school in Brookings, he's majoring in ag, and I don't know if he'll ever farm, but he'll probably be doing kind of the same thing that I'm doing, and that's kind of being connected with agriculture. My oldest son works for a large farming operation outside of town, and he enjoys what he's doing. So two of my three sons are connected with ag, and I guess the third one, he lives in Sioux Falls. He works for a two-way radio company and does a lot of 911 work, but he does some installs for some farmers too, so he's kind of connected with ag too, I guess, a little bit. So I would like to say my whole family is kind of connected with agriculture.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? Anything you'd like to add at this point?
Well, I guess in closing, I'd just like to say that I've enjoyed working for cooperatives. I've only worked for two cooperatives in my entire career, but I've enjoyed working with them. I've liked the closeness that I've been able to get with customers. You really get to know your customers and become quite attached to them. I just think it's been a good career. It's not over with yet, but I hope I can enjoy my remaining working years doing the same thing I'm doing.
Okay. We've been visiting with Ron Gerlach. Thank you for participating in the Cooperative Legacy Project, and good luck to you and the co-op here.
Thank you very much, Chuck, for your time and for your efforts in promoting this legacy project as well.
Okay. Okay. Okay.